So I do want to mention, yes, what I'm going to be talking about tonight is actually a paper that just came out in August. So it is legit research publication, and I'm really happy and excited to share with you the results from that work. Sometimes I find it really nice to actually just dive into a specific paper like this versus trying to talk about, although there's a lot of stuff going on in this paper, it's just really nice to focus in on something and share with you all. But as I mentioned, I am the Conservation Program Manager, and I manage two major programs here at the field station. So on our right, or on your right, is our Land Conservation Specialist program. We actually have two land conservation specialists listening in tonight. I saw them via Zoom. So thank you, Fletcher and Chris, for tuning in. But our land conservation specialists are remotely stationed in the U.S. Department of Agricultural Service centers. So most at these centers, we have the Farm Service Agency and the Natural Resources Conservation Service. So we work directly with the NRCS, and they are responsible for different farm bill conservation programs, private land conservation programs. And actually my research directly ties in to NRCS. So that's exciting. So the things I'm sharing with our land conservation specialists tonight, they could potentially use in discussions with landowners and NRCS as well. Our other conservation program here at NGRREC is our Habitat Strike Team. So we have a team that utilizes our garage space, and they have a trailer truck. They have all sorts of tools to actually go out on the landscape and actually do habitat restoration and management. So today they're actually on a prescribed fire. I believe it was a prairie burn. So this is the burn season for them this time of year. So they're going out doing timber stand improvement with chainsaws, doing lots of herbicidal spraying of non-native species such as bush honeysuckle. And we work directly with our partners, the Illinois Department of Natural Resources, and also one of their programs called IRAP, which stands for Illinois Recreational Access Program. So this incentivizes landowners to allow their land to be publicly accessed, mostly for hunting purposes. And in return, they can get some type of benefit that's a lease payment, but also if they're lucky, our Habitat Strike Team to go out on their land repeatedly and do some type of habitat restoration work. So this is being recorded. So we recorded our past neighbor night. So if you want to check out those neighbor night events, you can do that right here. All right, let's dive into our topic for tonight. So as you saw, the title was about grassland birds. This paper came out a couple of years ago in Science 2019. And what they were finding is that we've lost nearly 3 billion birds over from the 1970s. So that's a pretty, obviously stark decline, population decline. This isn't just Canada and North America, US and Canada. And you break that down further by different types, different groups of birds. And we see on our on your right there, it's actually our grassland birds that have suffered the most loss. Compare that to forest birds or birds from the tundra, shorebirds. It's grassland birds that have suffered the most loss. And so that's, 53% population decline. So these are great infographics that Cornell has come out with. I've used them. And so that's, 3 in 4 meadowlarks gone from the 1970s. So quite a bit of loss, especially in our grassland birds. If you go on the other side of the pond, so to speak, in the EU, they're actually finding similar things going on. Over there, I've learned they call them farmland birds. They don't call them grassland birds, they call them farmland birds. And if you even go to other parts of the world, similar things are occurring. So the reason why this is occurring is probably no big surprise. The main driver, of course, is habitat loss. So at least in this country and probably lots of parts throughout the world, really the farms have changed from our past farms. Before, there's a lot more diversity of crops. You might have more pasture for your cattle or your horses. You also have, used to have more of these things we call fence rows, like just along in the farm, along different crop fields. And, now, I'm not saying all farms are like this, but we just have a lot larger farms these days, a lot more modern farm technology. Farming is cleaner, so there's more, pesticides being sprayed. There's less weeds even out there, so even those weedy species can be good for wildlife and grassland birds and their arthropod food resources. So in 1985, the government realized, with all this farming going on, especially in maybe some areas where farming shouldn't occur, in really hilly ground or in wetland areas, they were losing a lot of soil, and this was causing a lot of environmental degradation. So in 1985, there was a new program, a private lands program called the Conservation Reserve Program. And so as of now, this is the most popular private land conservation program in the United States. And this encourages landowners to take some of that land out of production and actually plant some type of cover. So conservation cover could be a variety of things. So my land conservation specialist listening in right now might be working with some landowners in the future to help that landowner decide, do I need a grass waterway on my farm? Do I need filter strips to kind of buffer that this stream area? Do they need to do some type of wetland restoration or some type of easement, conservation easement? There's even windbreaks. There's a variety of different conservation practices that are available to the landowner. And so again, some of the staff here at NGRREC actually are working with landowners and deciding what they should put on their landscape. So I always like to do the analogy here. So as I just looked this up, over 2.5 million acres of CRP exists currently. That's 26.5 Rhode Islands. So just give you scale perspective. It's quite a bit of land out there. That's also, of course, good for reducing erosion, but also if you're a wildlife person like me, providing lots of wildlife habitat. So in 2004, it was great to get this conservation cover on the landscape. A lot of it is kind of more grassland related practices. But what happens if you leave a grass field or even a prairie restoration go for 10, 15 years? I also forgot to mention, and I want you guys to, if you have any questions, just raise your hand. So I'm asking you, what would happen if you just let a field go for 10, 15 years without doing anything to it?
Invasives.
Yeah, you might get some invasive encroachments. Anything else? Overgrown with maybe a dominant species, potentially. Yeah, those are all great answers. Anybody else? Woody encroachment. So if you're a grassland bird, woody species aren't very good. So yeah, those are great answers.
Oh, it's just me for now.
Oh, okay. You'll be, yeah, let me know if there's, yeah. So in 2004, the NRCS, or the Farm Service Agency, realized that to have more wildlife benefit for the CRP, there needs to be some type of disturbance on these CRP fields. So, and again, it's some of the land conservation specialists here listening in tonight that are helping landowners to decide what practice they should put on their CRP. So there are a variety of options. It kind of depends what the landowner might be comfortable with. So prescribed fire is something we always try to recommend, but some folks don't want to deal with fire, which is totally understandable. Also, there's that possibility of fire jumping into the cornfield during harvest, and that's no good either. But there's other options as well. Light strip disking, actually spraying that dominant grass can kind of knock it back and may hopefully allow some other species to come back, and also interseeding as well. This is a seed drill right here. All right, kind of moving into some of the ways I think about wildlife. So we're talking about birds tonight, is that I like to look at wildlife and how they're responding to things like management, like a mid-contract management. But when we're doing wildlife studies, we can, do collect different types of data, and might depend on, you know, what, how many resources you have available to you. So one of the easiest things to collect would be just if the bird was found, you know, in that field, right? What would be some of the better types of data you could collect if you had the time and maybe the people power to do it? Besides just, oh, I went to a field, did a count, I detected this dick sisal in the field. Yeah, nesting, that would be a great one. Say it again? Abundance, yeah, that's a step up from, yeah, presence. Yeah, that would be good as well. Yeah, the indirect, kind of getting at the indirect effects of, yeah, food resources to the birds. Yeah, behavior. If you're also, maybe if you could put some track in how these adult birds are surviving, that would be great. So I just want to show you kind of the spectrum of data you can collect. So we can get presence from just basic surveys. You can get presence, kind of abundance, density. Of course, if you're counting every bird out there, you can start to understand what's going on with the community. I'll talk more about this, but certain organizations have attached kind of conservation values to different birds as well. So we can look at, you know, what is this management practice doing for conservation value? And I think, yeah, one of the best things you can do is get that nesting data, get that adult survivorship. And if you can attach, oh, adults are surviving year to year and producing more young in this type of management practice, that's like the holy grail of data you can associate with, you know, wildlife habitat. So of course, those types of data are a lot harder to come by. So a lot of times your study area gets a little bit smaller because to find all these nests and monitor all these survival of birds, it's more challenging. All right, I'm gonna be talking about some of these birds tonight. Anyone have any familiarity with grassland birds around here? All right, we'll see. Well, hopefully after tonight, you'll know a few of them at least. So, all right, here we go. These videos were working earlier. Well, hopefully they'll still work. Okay. Yes. All right. Bobbling, does everyone agree? Okay. All right. I'll try to talk over this bobolink, but yes, this is a bobolink. So tonight I'm going to be using these terms. I should have been able to stop this. I don't know if I can. But tonight I'm going to be using the terms obligate and facultative. Does anyone have an idea what that might mean? So let me see if I can turn this down a little bit first. Yeah, it's more of a, yeah, exclusive to, like, more of a, I'd say, grassland specialist. So yeah, that's a great answer versus a facultative species. Yeah, I think of it as this, yeah, has a wider range of habitats it could be in. So the bobolink is a prime example of more of an obligate species. I think there's still kind of a spectrum even within these designations, but yeah, that's an obligate grassland bird. All right, we saw this one tonight, so it's not the brewer's blackbird. Yeah, it's the red-winged blackbird. So is this an obligate or a facultative grassland bird? Yeah, you can almost even looking at this picture right down below. It's probably on some cattails in a wetland, so they can live in kind of wetland areas, grassland areas. They're very kind of general in their habitat use. Probably the shortest song I've ever heard in my life. Yep, it's a Henzo Sparrow. So it's a obligate or facultative grassland bird. Yeah. Yeah, I don't see Henzo's, even this little prairie patch out there, probably too small for a Henzo Sparrow. I'll talk more about probably why you wouldn't find one out there as well. But yeah, this is a obligate grassland bird. Has a very high conservation value, which I'll talk about. Last one. I heard common yellowthroat. That is the correct answer.
There's lots of them up at the Fort Prairie. They greet you as you go into the prairie.
Oh. Are these obligate or facultative grassland birds? Also look at the picture, like look at this picture right here, that I got from the internet. That's kind of, I guess you could see something, maybe like there's like a big, it's a big tree like right here. So yeah, it's a more of a facultative grassland bird. They do like kind of wetter areas. All right, so you learned a few birds tonight, at least I can say that. So as I mentioned, this is actually a table right from the publication. I've kind of looked at how these birds are responding in terms of if they're obligate or facultative species. And then I went a little bit further, and if you look, some of these birds like, so this score right here is their kind of conservation value according to this Partners in Flight organization. But field sparrow and also northern bobwhite and ringneck pheasant, although facultative birds, you know, bobwhite and pheasant have a very high, you know, value in terms of, you know, hunters. So I kind of lumped them with the field sparrow and have kind of a separate analysis with this group as well. So the questions I had, you know, I had a variety of chapters in my, you know, dissertation, but the first one is just how the abundance and richness of these different groups change with different, more broad management practices. So we were working on native fields and more of a smooth brome field and specific management practices. How did these birds of conservation concern and economic importance respond to management? So those were these birds right here I just mentioned. And also, you know, we might find that a bird does really great and more of a native CRP, but, you know, in terms of its nest survival, but we might be finding more birds in, you know, these brome fields. So sometimes these things can be kind of like what we call decoupled or not associated. So that was something I was kind of interested in exploring. And finally, this is what the managers want to know is what do you recommend? You'll get that question the most. So I hopefully came up with a good answer to that as well. So I was doing this work up in northwestern Illinois, in Henry and Whiteside and Stark counties. Those are the most common counties we were in. So we're doing surveys. I was doing the surveys and I got to hire a field crew of 4 each year. And they were helping me with the nest searching. So again, very heavily agricultural up there, not to no one's surprise. And so I was looking at these 3 treatments. First, we had control. So this field right up here is a smooth brome. So again, this was heavily, it's really great at reducing erosion, but a lot of people, you know, don't think it has the greatest, you know, wildlife benefit. Yeah.
I don't know what brome means.
Smooth brome is just, there's different types of brome, and smooth brome is a type of grass. It's a cool season grass, and it's more really non-native, but people are using it for conservation cover because it's a sod forming grass and it's really great at reducing erosion. And that was the whole point of CRP in the beginning, is to reduce erosion. And then, you know, these are options that, you know, besides fire, we want to look at tractor-based management. So we had a light strip disking treatment. So we're removing about 50% of the vegetation, spraying using glyphosate, Roundup essentially. And then we had a spray and interseed treatment. So we were interested in looking to see how, you know, these different groups of birds are responding to these more specific treatments. So this is all tractor-based management. So you don't just disc the field all in one go. We're following NRCS guidelines and doing about a third of the field each year, about midway through that 10 to 15-year contract. So this is actually a Google satellite image showing you the effects on the vegetation from 1 year of management. So you actually can see it from aerial imagery, which is pretty cool. So as I mentioned, I did all the bird surveys. I'm in a more of a native field, CRP field there. That's a big blue stem. And on the left, that's a brome field that's had 1 year of management. And this was done a while ago. It takes a while to get this data all together, quite honestly. And I'll talk about some of the results. So as I said before, I was looking at all these different responses because I was trying to look at everything possibly that I could in this study, just from presence of even a nest to a conservation value of a nest. This one is looking at survivorship of nests. And then as all those other ones I mentioned before, presence and even conservation value. All right. So I'm going to walk you through some graphs. I do have some graphs, but these, are my results. So the red is brome, and the blue diamonds are native. So this is all species, not distinguishing between obligate or grassland birds. So this includes even general species like robins, things like that. I actually did find a robin nest on the ground in one of the CRP fields. So I just want to point out the fact that actually the native fields are having more bird species. So that's in terms of abundance and also richness. Does everyone know when I say the word richness, what I mean, like bird richness? Richness is just the number of different species, regardless of the amount of them. So it's just, in a way, it's how diverse the bird community is in the field. So in the more native fields, we're seeing more birds and also usually more species of birds. So we think that is because, I'll talk about this. So I have this one little blip there. I guess you can. So this the x-axis is the amount of management that has taken place regardless of the type. So again, I was looking at these broad and specific management practices. So basically there's more structure in these native fields, and that's probably going to attract more general species, more facultative species like the blackbirds, things like that. And that's what I discussed. So now I'm breaking this down by obligate and facultative species, and notice, so this blue again is native, and the long dashes are facultative. So in our native fields, we're seeing more facultative birds compared to brome. But when we go to obligates, we're seeing it actually flipped. So we're finding more obligate grassland birds and brome fields compared to native fields. And notice, if you go look down here, so red is, this graph is challenging, I'm not gonna lie. So as we're managing these fields more, we're seeing actually obligate grassland birds go down in richness. So we're counting less species of obligate grassland birds as we put more management on these fields. Yes, in the back.
When you speak about richness and counting, okay,
Mm-hmm.
do you have a time frame or is it for the season?
That's a good question. I glossed over the methods really fast. So this is the breeding season. I did.
I mean, in my own yard, the diversity is high, but it depends on what time of the season it is too, and what I've got planned with blooming or attracting.
Yeah, so this is all the surveys were done May to like early July. So I'm trying to hit that breeding bird season. Yeah, the question, been forgetting to repeat the question in the microphone, but Yeah, that's a great question. All right, I'm going to talk about, notice on the brome, the facultative birds are kind of like skyrocketing as we're putting more management up there, and I'll talk more about that. So this kind of figure has been published before. I didn't put this in the paper, but I created this specifically for tonight. And just to show you, like on the left might be more of a native structure, more diversity in those native fields, taller structure. And on the right might be what more of a brome field looks like. And this is subjectively, but in general, you can just think of these birds have a range of structural requirement, habitat requirements. So these bobolinks and Henzo sparrows really, at least where I was, were liking shorter types of grass like the brome. And as you manage that brome, it got more like this here on the left. So as you can see, I put this red-winged blackbird has the widest variation. So that's more facultative, more of a general species. So that's what we can kind of think about with these birds, have different habitat requirements. And that's like kind of explaining, I think, some of the results we're finding. Yeah, a question in the back.
Yeah, when you speak about the brome, I would assume because it's a cool season grass, it seeds early, so it would attract the birds. Yeah, it may be for some of the sparrows. That's a good question. I do not know in terms of the food resource for those birds. I know during the nesting season, though, insects are like probably the most important. Those because they're feeding their young insects and stuff like that. All right, so this is just for brome fields, and I'm sorry, I'll move this. Just showing brome, and notice down here, this is richness. There's a lot of overlap, but notice the black shapes, which are facultative birds, are generally higher, and that's kind of, they have more wider range of their habitat use, also in abundance as well. But notice in 2014, we see this kind of skyrocket of these facultative birds, and especially these spray seeded treatments, so the triangles and the diamonds there. And I want to talk to you about that because that's a big kind of anomaly in this figure here. And so this is what I was seeing visually in some of these spray fields. There was this dramatic release of these more unwanted species. I had farmers actually back out of the study because they didn't like what was going on in their field, and they're following what they're supposed to be doing according to the NRCS. This was also a picture after, this is 2012, it's a drought year. And so it was a drought year, we sprayed, and then I think that those combinations of the two really kind of released that seed bank in some of these fields. And we had this dramatic release of this plant called horseweed or mare's tail. Some people also a nasty invasive called wild parsnip. Don't get this on your skin, it will blister. Don't touch this plant. Have a lot of scars from running into parsnip. But certain birds were responding to this. So the blackbirds were nesting in parsnip. And they just kind of, I noticed in some of these fields, it's almost like a red-winged blackbird factory. They were just so abundant. So that's kind of, I think, back to the figures I was talking about with the red-winged blackbird response. They were even starting to flock even more, I thought, as well. But anyway, this is probably more of a better response to some of the management that we saw in our study. So again, Western ragweed, if you notice, does anyone know this plant back here? Yeah, even some milkweed popping up from this management, which is great. So probably these aren't like your ideal, wildflowers popping up from the management, but still this is adding diversity in these fields and probably attracting a lot more arthropod food resources. And then finally, this is the last figure, I think the last figure. This is just getting at the specifics. So the black line is brome and the dotted line is native. So notice as we're doing management, these obligates are going mostly down. Bob white, though, appear to be going up as we're managing native fields. But notice red-winged blackbirds, they're just skyrocketing their abundance as we're putting more management on these fields. So in turn, that's actually explaining why our conservation value is actually going quite down on brome fields as we manage them. All right, so this goes back to that figure I showed you with the vegetation structure. I do want to point out this black square is our disking. Notice that it has more intermediate effects. So as we manage fields, they tend to look more like this. And these are more like brome fields. But as we do the disking, there's some probably diversity, but notice it's not as strong. So that's actually what I'm recommending, that actually light strip disking might be kind of a more happy medium. Especially if you're not sure what the seed bank is in your field, that maybe disking might have the best options for more birds. Because if you spray some of these fields, at least where I was, you might be getting rid of a lot of your obligate grassland birds. So I just mentioned this. So and actually we found this with the other study that we did, that the more we disc some species of birds, their nest survival was a lot higher as well. So the take home of this study was that there's just differential responses to obligating and facultative birds, and that's to be expected. They have different habitat requirements. We did find some decoupling of survival, like for instance, meadowlarks were found most often in brome fields, yet when you do the analysis, their nest survival was better in native fields. So what do you tell a landowner, or what do you tell? And there's probably more research that needs to be done, but sometimes we're finding these things and we have to come up with explanations, or sometimes we don't have the best answer. Conservation value actually was highest on fields that were unmanaged in my analysis. So I'm not saying we want to have a bunch of brome out there for sure, but just to say having some of this brome is probably not a bad thing for some of these birds. And as we manage, this value decreased on non-native fields. And as I said before, I think light strip disking actually might be a nice conservative practice to recommend to a lot of these landowners. It's a lot probably cheaper than spraying or doing a fire, and a lot of producers actually have an agricultural disc do some of this stuff. So that would be my recommendation. I do want to thank, I did this work at SIU Carbondale, so thank my advisors, Clay Nielsen and Don Sparling, all the private landowners, all the folks that are involved. These are the pictures of my field crews for 4 years. Tons of help from them. And thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to take any questions you might have.
I know this isn't about the birds you did, but how is the prairie chicken project going? Out of curiosity? You know?
I know, Dick, you might know more. I know they've been trying to introduce birds that improve the genetic diversity. I forget when the last one they did was, but I know the issue with the Illinois population is that there's a lot of like inbreeding depression, that population. So I think it was birds from Kansas that were actually bringing to the Illinois populations, but
I think I didn't want to see the science, but I think it is holding its own, but it's requiring the kind of thing that Dustin said, both in terms of trying to increase genetic diversity, but just bringing more in. It's just one of those things that, in the end of the day, there's really not enough land to sustain it in the way that
and they have a lek mating system too, which has its own complications. The question was about the prairie chickens in Illinois. Sorry, I've been forgetting to repeat the question for the online audience.
Well, they had to skip here or so because they lost the funding too.
Yeah.
That might have impacted that.
Yeah, there's been over 20, 30 years, lots of looks like that. It's
Mhm.
not always been really the thing.
curious, has any part or parts of this study been done before, or was yours the first that did this, or, you know?
So the question was if there's any other studies like this one before, and I guess the answer is actually Doug Osborne, who was at SIU Carbondale, did a similar study with mid-contract management, but was in Wayne County, Illinois, which is a little bit further south. A lot of CRP there. So kind of similar questions. It's a lot of this when you get the data, how do you want to like go about it? So very similar questions, but I took it in this obligate facultative route. I looked at nest survival that hadn't been really looked at. So I was trying to do, I guess we're always told to try to do something a little more novel, and I was just trying to take it in a little bit different direction. But yeah, there's been studies in Nebraska. I think one of the first mid-contract management studies has been in Nebraska, and they were finding similar things too. So as they were managing, like bobolinks were going down, and they were working in, I think, fescue fields, which is probably similar to smooth brome.
So they were using similar management strategies you did. I mean, you did like 4 management strategies, and they did as well, and then came up with similar results. I know they're the way they conducted the results.
Yeah, it's somewhat similar, I would say. Yeah, there's, like Henzo Sparrow and Bobbling, there's a lot of studies that like after you burn or do some type of management, certain species do go away for a time being, and then they come back. So, yeah.
I'm also interested in the farmers who give up their land. Well, they stop growing on the land. I understood they're pretty well reimbursed for giving up that land. I mean, there's more profit in giving up the land and doing things like this than growing their crops.
Yeah, so the question was about the farmer reimbursement. I don't have those numbers like in my head, but I know like if you have a lot of land to retire, you can be doing pretty well. I think there is though a cap with the payment to a landowner with CRP. There is like a ceiling.
CRP has gone, if you look at it over the course of the decade, it's gone way down. Because of, I think it's partially like the funding allocated to it. So there's a limit to my understanding. And that's been, I know that there's been some research kind of trying to relate that to
Okay, so I guess I thought they just allowed it to lay dormant, but they have to be active participants in doing this.
It's
some kind of management.
There's and I think actually right now this used to be cost shared. I believe mid-contract management is not able to be cost shared anymore actually, but they are supposed to be maintaining. But there's a lot of variation out there, and my land conservation specialist on the call can attest to that. There's sometimes you'll have producers just like mow the entire field, and some of that's maybe because of just the education of what they can and cannot do. But I know certain producers, they want certain looks on their field, and yeah, so it is like very variable in how good of stewards I would say of the CRP there is out there. Yeah, they're supposed to be cutting out trees and things like that, ideally on grassland practices. And no, people get busy. It's hard work to do this management too, as well. So
I'm curious about like some of the management practices that you didn't necessarily look at, like burning and also like grazing and maybe pasture grazing. Like, what have you seen from research that looks at those management practices? And I come from partially from an angle that I know like all of these practices cost money, but grazing is the only one that has the potential to pay back, and that's the only one that NRCS is not eligible. You can get a reduced payment for it, basically.
there are definitely patch burn grazing studies out there and grazing studies. I'm not as familiar with them. I do revert back to structure though. The birds and lots of wildlife are responding to the structure. So I remember reading some patch burn grazing studies where like, I think Henzo Sparrow, it was like, yeah, right after it, it was maybe kind of low, then they came back, but as you didn't graze it and do disturbance, so they started to go down again. So that's, I guess that's what I've been noticing a lot in the literature. Also, grassland birds seem a little bit more just kind of conflicting results out there in the literature, maybe compared to forest birds. That's something when I was studying for my comprehensive exams, it seems like it was always occurring, all these exceptions out there, and even more so with grassland birds, it seemed like. Any other questions?
This is more like you mentioned, like the ecological value. I forgot what like. Can you remind me what the term was?
That was is conservation value. That
What is under that conservation?
that's a really good question. So Partners in Flight is the organization that has this great database of birds. Well, from my understanding, it takes into account breeding bird survey data. You know, that's the most widespread kind of more, it's similar to a Christmas bird count, but it's during the breeding bird survey, and you have these routes, you count birds. And so all these volunteers nationwide and in Canada are doing this. So they have a really extensive data set with that. And so they're using, I believe, that data set. And based on like region, so if bobbling links are doing well out east, their conservation value might be a little bit lower versus in the Midwest. So they're using that data, to my understanding, and national trends. And that's a really good question. I can definitely point you to that resource if you like it. Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of neat to look at your data from that perspective. That's why I wanted to do that. So any other questions?
Plus, I might just point out from a National Great River perspective, it's interesting, and I think you were looking at some of the more common practices that are out there right now, which is a great way to start, and trying to think about their value to grassland birds. The whole reason that these programs exist right now has a lot to do with the federal government's interest in soil and water conservation. Some other time, it's a story for another day. I mean, NGRREC is extremely active in trying to figure out which of those practices are most effective in reducing nutrient loss, most cost effective. And hopefully, as time goes on, we're integrating what works for wildlife and what works for soil and water conservation. But there are important questions on that side of the consideration as well.
Well, thank you all so much for the attending and coming out and the questions. I really appreciate it. So I'll be happy to take more in the hall too, if you want to talk more as well. So thank you. Yeah.